Good morning, everyone. We'll start in about 30 seconds. I'll just give as many people as possible an opportunity to join us. So we're going to kick off within the next 30 seconds or so. So bear with us. So good morning and welcome to this, everyone, to this Morgan Hunt webinar on student and staff wellbeing, where we'll take a deep dive into the trauma-informed approach by Kirklees College. We'll explore their trailblazing methods, which began about 12 years ago, their journey through implementation, and how they have transformed student and staff wellbeing using this trauma-informed and restorative approach, and how they've now begun to embed this as a key strategy across their whole organisation. My name is Claire Canary, and I'm a director at Morgan Hunt, and I also lead on human resources and employee wellbeing. For those of you not familiar with us, Morgan Hunt is an award-winning national recruitment business. We have 150 expert recruiters across the UK in Glasgow, Manchester, Birmingham, and London. We were established over 30 years ago, and Morgan Hunt provides specialist recruitment services to thousands of organisations across the public and private sector. And we're market-leading recruiters for the further education sector specifically. So this promises to be a really interesting session. And I'm delighted to be joined this morning by three of the team from Kirklees College. So first of all, welcome to Polly Harrow, who is Assistant Principal at Kirklees College and Department for Education Student Support Champion. Polly has worked in education for over 25 years and has a significant track record across the sector. Polly is also the Senior Designated Safeguarding Lead at Kirklees College, a qualified trauma and mental health national practitioner, a prevent national practitioner, and a senior mental health lead. I'm also delighted to welcome to our session today, Carlie Smith, who is the Safeguarding and Behaviour Manager at Kirklees College. And we'll also be joined by Philippa Lucarz, who is Executive Director of People and Culture at Kirklees College. So before we start our conversation this morning, a few pointers on the format of our session. We'll aim to finish at about 11 a.m. So that should give us about 45 minutes for our main conversation. And I'll aim to leave about 10 to 15 minutes at the end for your audience questions. So please, if you have any questions at all, please post those in the YouTube chat at any stage of our conversation. I will see all your questions and we'll aim to answer as many as we can, time allowing this morning. So to kick off our conversation, Polly, if I could come to you initially, would you please explain how and why Kirklees College became a trailblazer and was one of the first colleges in the UK to embrace a trauma-informed approach to student wellbeing?
Yeah, thank you, Claire, and good morning, everybody, and thanks for asking us to do this, Claire. It's a pleasure to be here. In brief, I'm going to give some pointers actually to other pieces of information. There's quite a number of blogs on the ETF website and that I've also had published in FE Week that go into a lot more detail about the background. But I am a survivor, a thriver of trauma myself, quite significant trauma. And I did the trauma-informed postgrad diploma, which enlightened me quite profoundly about what trauma is and the impact on development and health and well-being and brain development, which I'm particularly interested in. And I also went through, and again, a little plug, Steve Wright has written a piece in FE Week last week about this. But my husband and I, Steve Wright, went through restorative justice process when my brother-in-law was murdered. And we met some years afterwards the person who had committed that murder, and it was transformational. And we sat together after our combined experiences, my husband also being a survivor and thriver of very significant trauma through childhood. And we said, how can we actually put this to use in education? And it just occurred to us about the huge benefits that could be brought into an education setting, knowing how we personally had been impacted and really believing that certain strategies would be very, very effective. So that's how it actually really started. And then I introduced it into the faculty of student support, student experience and well-being, and that's where it began.
Great, thank you, Polly. That makes a lot of sense. Anything you referenced, blogs, links to articles, we'll endeavour to share those afterwards as well, because I think, as you say, that will give a lot more context. So, that was 12 years ago. So why was it important at that stage for the college to embrace this approach? Why was it the best approach at that stage? What was going on, I suppose, at Kirklees that meant actually, yeah, this could really work for us?
Well, it was an approach that I'd started embedding prior in my previous college. So when I came to Kirklees College, it was really about bringing that kind of knowledge and understanding that I'd gained over the years, and then looking at the practice around, which still 12 years ago was, asking students to leave classrooms, not allowing students in classrooms, the kind of language that was being used about students, which was harmful. The fact that it was clear that we didn't have a shared understanding of the intricacies and delicacies of the teenage brain development, and that actually unwittingly many times we were re-triggering trauma responses in students by our body language, by the way we were speaking. But also it was about looking at exclusions and suspensions and disciplinaries, saying we can do this in a very different way. And what I suppose the main thrust was, we keep pushing people out of classrooms, out of corridors, out of the college community. We need to bring them in. How do we bring them in and be truly inclusive, and also respond to school experience that the young people were bringing into the college? So knowing that they'd had sometimes negative experiences in school. And so really wanting to make Kirklees College the most positive, healthy learning environment for our young people, and indeed working environment for our staff. So all of those behaviours, punitive approaches, which don't work with students and don't help them thrive, we wanted to change.
Yeah, thank you, Polly. And Carlie, could I ask you from a kind of safeguarding perspective at that stage? I mean, I'm not sure whether you were personally involved the whole way through, but why was it the best approach from your perspective?
So I think in terms of recognising the development of the teenage brain and understanding that, I mean, I think it's important to note that we're doing it from an education point of view. We're all educators, and that is whether we are you know, working directly with students in a classroom, or it's the, you know, the member of staff that you buy your lunch from. We're all there to educate as an organisation, and safeguarding is part of that, in learning how, students learning how to keep themselves safe and keep each other safe. But when, you know, students who have potentially had poor experience of education or don't have good, solid relationships, the trust isn't there. And if the trust isn't there, they're not going to open up and talk to people about, you know, what's going on for them. So from a safeguarding point of view, I suppose the measure is it's increased disclosures. I wouldn't even want to hazard a guess at how much over the years. And it means that those young people are more open to trusting an adult to get the help that they need, and building that skill moving forward of self-help, if you like, of finding the tools and the support that they need to support them either through something that they have no control over, or be able to find ways to get them through those really difficult times.
Thank you, Carlie. And I mean, looking back now, what advice, Polly, do you have for other colleges who maybe have started their own journey in terms of embedding a similar approach? You know, what would you say to them to help them learn from your experiences?
Well, I work with colleges right across the country, and I'm always in colleges delivering training on this. And I think that what I would say is don't give up. One of the things that I do hear from colleges is that they've started trauma informed and it's a bit difficult, and then we stop doing it. And I kind of saying, why is it difficult? And so it's really important that staff understand why. Why would you do this? Rather than it being done to them, it's really engaging them. I wrote a 90-minute introductory module, which is what many colleges have. You know, I've shared that practice across the sector many times and nationally, because it's really important that the staff get on board. You know, and you know, it's like buy-in is a verb, isn't it? It's a doing word. You can't just demand buy-in. You staff have to offer it. And if you want it, you need to really explain why you're doing it. And when you talk to further education practitioners, further education, in my view, being like the fairy godmother of all education sectors, they don't want another thing to have to do. So if it feels like it's onerous and you're putting that, and actually it's really simple. And I would say keep it simple, explain the how very clearly to change culture, so to really embed culture shift. Why wouldn't you do it? Not why would you do it? And it's as simple as this, you know, be human, be harmless, be kind. You know, and so we do come up sometimes against some resistance in colleges to people who want to be punitive and they want to be authoritative. And it doesn't mean that there aren't sanctions and consequences. It means there are consequences and accountability. So it's about careful explanation, take your time. You know, have your strategy or your action plan. You know, you're not going to do it overnight. It's work that has no deadline, so it's ongoing forever. But it's a deep culture shift in respecting every person who walks through the door. So I'd say don't give up, but look at the why before you do the how.
Yeah, I guess everyone's bringing their, you know, preconceived ideas and also learned behavior. And that's how the approach has been. That's how they went through education. That is in their mindset. And that's what you've got to tackle. Carlie, is there anything you'd add to that from a kind of safeguarding perspective in terms of what other colleges can learn from your experience?
I think, you know, obviously I am safeguarding and behaviour manager, but I think all of it does come down to behaviours and values, doesn't it? And if you get in the, you know, Polly's sort of touched on it as well, the skill that we're hoping students will leave with is that they will make the right choices because they care about the consequences and the impact that they have on others, not because they fear the consequences, because at some point that fear will go. If you've had, you know, a few speeding fines and you've been on a few speeding courses and you're still speeding, whereas if you are, you know, encouraged to look at the wider impact that you're having on the community around you and you feel like you belong to that community and you care about that community, you're more likely to make the right choice, either to keep yourself or others safe, if you want to talk about safeguarding, or in terms of not preventing other people's learning. And you know, in the same way that we might have a student who comes in at 16 who really struggles with maths, we will teach them maths. If they really struggle to behave, we need to understand that that's something we also have to teach them, and we have to guide them through that and coach them through that in a supportive way. So I think that's the only thing I would add. In terms of the resistance that you might get with anything that sounds like a new approach, you do, and you always will get that resistance. And I think probably 8 years ago, when I started working really closely with Polly on this, that was something that I found really challenging. I almost relish it now because there is no reason not to do this. And it doesn't matter who you're speaking to. If you're speaking to somebody who wants to understand the science behind it, you've got the science of the brain and how that supports. And ultimately, our students are here because we want them to learn, to succeed, to go on to the next stage in life as successfully as possible. And if their brain is not in a place where their learning can be engaged because they're in fight, flight or freeze, then that's your hook for somebody who's a scientist. And then you might have somebody who is just nurturing by nature and they want to do the right thing, and understanding why that approach and why they've always been that way, and their empathy and what impact their empathy has. So I think if I was saying to somebody, you know, this is how you would implement it, is find your hook with your audience. Because
think about who you're talking to.
Audience.
Yeah. Thank you, Carlie. And, you know, you've touched on some of the challenges, but Polly, thinking back, what were, like, if you were to think about some of the key challenges that you guys faced, what were they?
I would say one of them, interestingly, was really understanding the notion, or shifting the dial on the notion of belonging. We use terminology and we really get so used to it that it begins to lack meaning. And so, you know, it was really rewriting what belonging, which underpins the relational practice of building trust and respect and empathy, developing empathy. That belonging isn't about the lanyard you're wearing or the ID badge you've got, or whether you've got, you know, sign in processes in order to enter the college. Belonging is really about being part of that community. And when we talk about a trauma-informed and restorative approach, we're talking about not, I mean, physical safety is very important, and colleges do that very well. We're talking about psychological and emotional safety. That's what belonging really is. I'm not going to be ridiculed. I'm not going to be offended, insulted, re-traumatized. And so it was about 10 years ago that I kind of came up with this little phrase, which was warmly welcomed and wanted every student, every day, by everyone. And that has now grown and grown and grown, and we're now having, you know, that's being put up at every single site now. But when Ofsted came, they said to me, "That's really powerful, and what does that mean?" And I said, "It is a daily reminder to welcome, that you want your students need to feel welcomed and wanted. They need to feel loved, actually." And a lot of students come to college and they're already loved and they're already psychologically and emotionally safe, and a lot of them aren't. And that's who we want to work with, you know. So it's really turning the dial on. The students are difficult, so we'll get rid of them and we'll just keep the nice ones and the ones that are really compliant. 2, how, you know, they are not hard to reach. We cannot reach them. They're not difficult. We find them difficult. How can we change, you know? So I think that, you know, going back to some of the difficulties, it was really re-establishing what belonging and inclusion truly meant.
Yes, thank you.
One example.
Yeah. Thank you, Polly. And Carlie, if I can kind of touch on the, you know, how you went about implementing this. And I'm thinking, you know, learned behavior, it's not just the staff who have learned behavior. I'm guessing with the key steps in terms of that implementation, you had to approach your student body in a different way. And that must have been different for them because they had been treated in a certain way, maybe at school or previously at college, and then this was a different approach. Can you talk us through the key steps in terms of implementing this approach with the student body?
Yeah, and that obviously does come from the staff approach and the staff collectively, you know, getting on board to change a culture. And that's very few words, and actually that's the enormous piece of the work. But I think one of the things that staff told us at the beginning was that the majority of them, they got it, they wanted to be on board with it, they just needed tools, they needed specific tools to do it. So one of the early things that we implemented with the student body, which was easy to implement, incredibly effective, and we still do to this day, is a meet and greet rota. So every day our staff, at the times at which most students will be entering the building, so between 9:15 and 9:30, there are members of staff on every one of our entrances. And the reason that they're there is to say good morning, and same after lunch. The reason that they're there is to say hello to the students. And I think one of the most powerful things that I witnessed, and we did laugh about it at points, was that I couldn't believe how many students were so taken aback by somebody saying hello and smiling. And it really showed me that those students didn't expect an adult or a member of staff to speak to them. They didn't expect somebody to say hello and notice them. And then so if I take an academic year as an example, you might have somebody in September who looks mortified actually when you say good morning and walks past you. And then by October half term, you get an imperceptible nod from them. And then by Christmas, you might get a morning. And that, in terms of distance travelled, was enormous for us. And then on the staff side of it, you had some staff who were like, well, they don't say good morning back. So trying to shift that mindset of that isn't the bit that matters. That isn't the bit that matters. The bit that matters is the student has heard that they matter to you enough to greet them. And recognising that, you know, for lots of different reasons, we've got an awful lot of students who live independently. You know, we've got a high number of care experienced learners. We've got some students whose families will have gone out to work at 6 o'clock that morning, and that might be the first interaction they've had. You know, so from that point of view of being able to help calm the brain and create that psychological safety as they walk through the door before they even get to the classroom door was really important. And it's an opportunity. So you as the person on meet and greet might never see that student again. But you're wearing a lanyard and you're representing Kirklees College and you're representing education. So you're building the relationship with education and the organisation and the community as a whole in those things. And that was just a really simple, effective and easy thing that we implemented.
Yeah.
But
that sounds obvious, doesn't it? But yeah,
it does.
Very
and it was,
impactful.
Yeah, it was.
Polly, did you have something to say about that?
I just wanted to add that language is so important. And so we had, so we changed our language around. So we had inclusion panels. So we wouldn't use the word exclusion. We haven't used the word exclusion, and that matters. You know, when I can't remember, Philippa might remind us, but you go to a what's the disciplinary panel that some colleges have, and it's like a dismissal panel, and staff go, what's the point of me going? It's a dismissal panel. It's clear what's going to happen. When you have an exclusion panel, the students say, what's the point of me coming? It's clear that the idea of this is, you know, So we changed it to inclusion panels, which intrigued families and carers and students, and they went, "Oh, inclusion panel, what's this about?" It's kinder. It involves more people. We can put the student at the centre and really hear. So one of the things that was really effective was saying, you cannot withdraw a student without going through this process. And if you think a student needs to be withdrawn, and we do have a threshold, if you are at risk of causing harm to yourself or others, we understand that this isn't the right time or the right place. We don't have a fitness to study policy. We have a right time, right place policy. But with an inclusion panel, we would have students and staff would be invited from the curriculum. And they would say, why didn't we know this about this student? Well, curiosity lies behind everything we do. So the inclusion panel is a restorative program, which enables any damage to relationships to be repaired and so on and so on. So one of the things we did with our students was we started doing restorative one-to-ones, group restorative in the corridor, always trying to mend and fix rather than, exclude, suspend, and what I was saying earlier. So the inclusion panels, the changing of the language, the changing of the way that we did things, and the inviting people to come and talk. You have to remember, relational practice is all about communication, and communication as mere human beings is all we have, and we need to use it. So you talk it through rather than demonize people and exclude people. We value a humane approach above all, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense.
No, it does, Polly. And I mean, you've touched on some of those kind of key practice changes. So I'll go on to kind of, because Carlie, you mentioned this approach to training and development of staff, that actually your approach to the student body started there. So maybe you could kick us off and talk us through how you approach that training and development. And then Philip, I'll ask you for some input from a kind of a HR perspective. Carlie, if you could talk us through how you approach that staff development.
Yeah, and I think it was really about who was going to be ready to implement this now. And obviously there was myself and Polly and a couple more colleagues in leadership who completed the trauma-informed mental health informed practitioner diploma, and that gave us the ability to do sort of a train-the-trainer model, if you like. And Polly developed a 90-minute module for all staff to give that really deep awareness of it, some tools to move forward with, but giving it a really human angle as well, as Polly talked about at the beginning, being able to talk about her own trauma and being able to give trauma a face. I think that was really important. And then, so we looked at, like I said, you've got people who are probably working in a trauma-informed way immediately, and you go, they're ready to be implementing it. And that is usually your pastoral team. And I would imagine in most organisations, it's probably your HR teams as well, if you're talking, outside of education. And then you look at who is it important that we get to next, and that has to be your classroom practitioners. They're the people who are seeing the students most and are going to have the most impact on your life. And I think every adult that I've spoken to can remember a teacher that they really didn't like and a teacher that they really loved. Mm-hmm. And so empowering teaching staff to understand the enormity of their place in a young person's life, and what they want to do with that. And like Polly said earlier, we were very, very conscious that we didn't want teaching staff to think that we were giving them something else to do on top of. This isn't another job, it's a way to be, not a thing to do. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to look at how how we could do that in the easiest way possible. So I worked with the quality team, the quality of teaching and learning team, and we settled on Dan Hughes's PACE model being something that we thought teachers would be able to relate to. The vast majority of them would be incorporating some of the elements of it, and it was something that we could measure when we were doing observations. So making sure that teachers were incorporating, so PACE is play, acceptance, curiosity and empathy, into the lessons, which they already were, but giving them a level of understanding of why those tools really work. And we're not talking we're going to get some Uno cards out and play, but having that playful approach, getting to know the students, being able to comment on the hair when they walk through the door, so they're valued and they're recognised, and separating any behaviours from the person. So we're accepting of the situation that student might be in, and so it's and not but, and we're all here to, you know, learn, and this is what our expectations are. And the curiosity, like Polly said, is absolutely key. If we don't seek to understand the behaviour, we're not going to fix the behaviour. So
Yeah.
behaviour is always a symptom, and the behaviour, you're putting a sticking plaster on an open fracture.
Thank you, Carlie. Sorry, I lost a little bit of that, but I think we got most of it. And Philippa, could you, kind of from a HR perspective, what was your approach to that training and development of staff?
Yeah, I think just touching on something that Polly said there that I think is so impactful is how powerful language is. So when you see the important role that that has in a restorative approach, what fundamentally sits behind what we're trying to do is change behaviours and habits. We're changing culture. So part of what I think has made the approach at Kirklees so successful is it's been nudged through. It's not just been a one-off presentation from Polly or Carlie. There's been training infused with different groups, repeated at different times, and I think that's played such an important role. So there was a lot of awareness raising. So as sort of Polly mentioned, there was a very powerful lived experience message, which was grounded in real life impact. And I think that helped staff connect emotionally with the why. And Polly talked to us a little bit about why the why is so important. And I think that really helped with the choice to buy in. And then that's been nudged through. So we've had all that training delivered across teams with staff, but we've had our cross college culture days that we have, our learning and development days, where we've had guest speakers, and it's either been on a restorative message, or we've spoken to our speakers before about interweaving a restorative message to keep bringing that through. We've had training with the board, with exec. We've used our cross-college management groups. We'll refer to restorative and trauma-informed, not just in how we address, but keep bringing that through with staff addresses, management meetings. So there's been a real coordinated effort to bring it to life, because it's a core part of our identity. And as sort of Polly referred to, it's not a destination, it's a journey, it's an evolution, and it's a practice we have to embed. So it's something that we keep front and centre, because we're wanting people to be more consciously intentional in how they interact with students, with staff, within our broader community. So I think there's just been a real cross-college effort with skilling managers locally, but also then that broader training with staff and across college.
Great, thank you, Philippa. That makes real sense. Sorry, Polly, go on.
Yeah, can I just add that I think we might talk more about recruitment later on, but we have an induction package for all new staff, and a trauma-informed restorative approach, the values around it, the why of it, and the how of it is in that induction package. So anybody joining the organisation has that training.
Great, thank you. And Polly, how did you kind of signpost or introduce this approach, or even did you bother to the student body? Was that important, or did you just kind of start to work with the staff and then that became the approach?
It's been very organic. I mean, this has been a really useful reminder, really, of where we started, because now we live and breathe it every second of every day. So the distance travelled you know, 12 years ago, some of the things that students or, you know, that staff might say, some language, for instance, that might have felt acceptable, would be that everybody knows that would not be acceptable now. It's not, there isn't one person in Kirklees College who isn't really clear about this approach. And I think with it was very organic because I led on the faculty of the whole of the student experience. So anything outside teaching and learning sat in the faculty that I was in, including safeguarding, including SEND, you know, including, you know, or tutorials and so on and so on. And so we were able to really develop it within that faculty. And really nailed it really well because we had tutorials so we could talk to the students about what we were doing. We had enrichment so we could do what we wanted. And it was when Palvinder, I think I've gone off your question slightly, but Palvinder Singh joined us as principal about 4 years ago. And he was the one who came to me and said, this work that you've been doing, like for the past 6 years, really, is fantastic, really, really powerful work. But I want it right across the college. So we'd got it completely nailed in pastoral safeguarding and so on. And that's when I you know, we took it wider. I mean, I don't know if you want me to talk about that now, but that's when I presented to governance and it became a key strategic priority, and we'll come back to that. So yes, it was very organic, but the faculty of student experience has so much front-facing connection with students. We were able to, you know, we did what we wanted, didn't we, Carlie? Really, we just said we want to do it this way, and that's what we did. And then the curriculum, the real heavy curriculum stuff, came after we made it a key strategic priority, I would say.
Thank you. And Carlie, I wanted to ask you about what you observed in terms of impact on student behaviour and overall, but I think you wanted to add something on that as well.
I did, and it links. It was that the students started to feel it because it was a culture of the staff and it was the way we do things around here. And I think the students have been used to a punitive approach to behaviour and to discipline, and therefore it was difficult for them to understand. And especially when you talk about, you know, fallouts, which I don't think it'll be a surprise to anyone, happen quite regularly with young people, and especially following COVID, when their only means of communication for a long time was through social media, and they're not face-to-face communicating, and they can say some absolutely terrible things. So what they'd always been used to, and as a parent I completely understand this, is stay away from each other. And actually when you break it down for staff and students, of that's not a healthy way of moving forward, and that's not how we would ever work, you know, that's not how we would be successful in a workplace. We're not going to ask two employees to work in opposite ends of a building. There's an expectation that we'll be able to navigate conflict. So I think, you know, it was a change in mindset for students as well. And those students who did go through that process, we're not asking them to be friends. We're asking them to agree a way to work together moving forward. But oftentimes the result is that they are friends because they've got a better understanding of how they both came to that situation. And you know, going back to, I know I'm sort of going back and forward, but I think it's important to note that one of the you know, the challenges potentially is sometimes that people think this is a soft approach, and that there are no consequences, and actually being held accountable for your own actions and the way that you've made somebody else feel is weightier than somebody adding a formal warning to your record that you might not have been involved in. So you know, I wanted to make that point really. And then in terms of embedding it further, we moved away from how many disciplinaries have we issued, and therefore what is the impact on behaviour, to really looking at what is the quality of those interventions and incorporating student voice into how we measure that. So you know, we've trained staff on being curious, on seeking to understand, on setting any targets for students that are related to them as an individual rather than related to what they've done wrong. And then speaking to students about, you know, why is it actually that you're you know, you're managing your behaviour better, or you're more regulated in lesson, and being able to make the link then that this approach means that they are better equipped to move forward, and being able to relay that to staff is really powerful. So where you're getting the impact and you can triangulate that impact, letting the staff know, you know, what they've done and how well they've done with it has been really important. And then we've talked a lot about language, and I just wanted to say as well, being really careful that we don't minimise what somebody's going through. I think all of us that work in education really want to solve things for students. We want to make things better, and that's absolutely natural and human. But we've also got to recognise that the enormity of some of the things that people are going through, whether that's staff or students, isn't going to be solved or made worse by anything we say. What will make it better is, well, we're not going to change the situation potentially, but what makes it better is that that person feels like they're not going through it alone. So, you know, rather than saying at least and trying to think of something that could be even worse, really recognising and allowing them to sit with the enormity of what's going on and making sure they know that somebody's there with them. And, you know, Brené Brown, her short clip on empathy, if anybody has 5 or 10 minutes, is absolutely worth that the time. It really coins, underpins what empathy meant to me. So that really spoke to me. And I've forgotten what your original question was, Claire.
Well, it was just really about the measuring of changes and improvement. Like you've mentioned, you stopped measuring certain things and started looking at the quality of the interventions.
Yeah, and being able to measure the impact, and we're very good in education on, you know, weighing things, aren't we? But we always try and reflect on, well, so what does that mean? If we've done 300 disciplinaries about attendance, but attendance hasn't gone up, we're not doing what we need to do. You know, there's a disconnect there somewhere. And I think in terms of, you know, Polly spoke about the inclusion panels. Our exclusions reduced over the 4 years, year on year, when we first introduced this. They reduced drastically. Because we did look at how we include that student. You know, our decision that it wasn't the right time or place was always based on risk. You know, boiling it right down to those people that were on the panel, it was about, is this student teachable? Are they going to do any harm? And are we going to do any harm by keeping them here? And if you've got your answer to those questions, then we can look at how we work with them. And having a really good, you know, highly skilled and developed mentoring team, where those students might need some really intentional and really intensive work on some of the barriers that they've got, and having a wealth of signposting. You know, we're very lucky as a college that we've got in-house counselling, and we've also got really good relationships with local partners as well. So yeah, that and measuring it in terms of safeguarding is really difficult, because like I said earlier, what we've seen is a massive increase in our safeguarding concerns. And I very much put that down to our students feel safe to tell us. They're not less safe than they were 15 years ago, but they're able to recognise that they're not safe and they want to tell someone.
Yeah, it's a safe environment to talk about it. Yes, Polly.
Claire, just to say, so firstly it was Brené Brown, Brene acute Brown.
Yeah.
Someone's just asked that question. But just to say that, I'll give you an example. When we say what, you know, if bad behaviour doesn't equal a bad person, You know, it's about what lies beyond. Carlie's already said this. What being curious about what behaviour is. All behaviour is communication of a need. So once you get that in your culture, then we're all, if staff and students, then you've always got a curiosity about what is provoking, what is triggering that behaviour, and you can deal with that without judging the person. But I think that so the curiosity goes into all your data. We're curious about, so you can't, so we stopped kind of going, oh, we've had 50 disciplinaries, you know, and each of them have had 2 interventions. We were going, what's the quality of that intervention? And we were asking the students, were you involved in that intervention? Did you have, some of the students that we spoke to years ago didn't even know they were on a final warning because it had just been put on their record. They weren't even informed about it. So it's kind of, we use another mantra, you know, about it doesn't have to happen to you for it to matter to you. And it doesn't have to have happened to you for it to have happened to somebody else. And that's empathy. But it's also that curiosity led us to uncover, I mean, it's much too detailed for this discussion now, but happy to talk outside this to anybody who's interested. But to really uncover where we needed to develop practice, where we needed to focus our training. But I just wanted to give one quick example. 2 students, okay, this is a real, we only use real examples because authentic examples have most resonance with fellow practitioners. But we had 2 students and they'd had a scrap, as Carlie had said, and typically they would be sent home. Okay, they'd be sent home. And what happened previously was they'd go home and the whole thing would go onto social media and absolutely blow up. And we'd end up with 2 families outside scrapping, let alone 2 students. When with this approach, when 2 students had a conflict, we were able to immediately do a restorative intervention, which completely de-escalated the situation, meaning that it doesn't leave the college because we haven't pushed it out. It doesn't leave the college and it doesn't get bigger and more unmanageable. There are so many arms and legs to this of benefits of de-escalation and decreasing conflict and disruption in teaching and learning. We could go on for days, but you know, it works. That's what we're saying. It really works.
Great. I just wanted to come back, Philippa, to yourself, if I could. I know, you know, you're still working on putting this into practice across all aspects of people and culture across the college. So how have you started to approach that? Because, you know, spent a bit of time on the student body, but you're trying to make it part of every part of the organisation.
Yeah, no, happy to share a couple of the things that the work that we're working on and that we're looking at. A couple of things to think about. I think the skilling and development of your HR teams, people and culture teams, when you think about the influential role they have in coaching and supporting middle managers who we know are the biggest influencer of staff engagement. So taking HR departments, sort of embedding a learning culture where they develop their restorative skills, I think is quite important. We've been very mindful of traditional HR policy language is not always very restorative. So we've been revisiting all of our policies through the lens of being more conscious and considerate around the language. What experience does that create for others? How will that more likely trigger a fight or flight response or sort of a stress feeling, or will it move us to a space of connection? And the intent is to try and leave every conversation in an interaction in a more connected space. So we've done quite a bit of work around policies. A specific policy that I think one we focused on is removing the grievance policy, which is very divisive and very verdict based. And we've introduced a resolution policy, which puts the focus on healing over verdicts and sort of shared accountability for co-creating solutions to challenges and problems. And I think that's quite an important step change. There's been a lot of work that's been done around recruitment and a focus on recruiting for shared values. So our values will be referred to in our adverts. In the application forms, we ask staff to talk to us, or applicants to talk to us about their values, and that feeds through to the selection process, where there's a real emphasis around behavioural recruitment and values, so that we are recruiting people who are the right fit for what matters to us, because, as I say, culture and values and trauma-informed approach is a core part of how we deliver our roles. So there's been a lot of work done there. We've looked at our wellbeing strategy through the lens of really making sure it's values-based. There's that real feeling of togetherness and shared responsibility for creating a culture of wellbeing. And we've also exploring things at the moment like our performance management process, and looking at managers through the role of a coaching partner, introducing more self-reflection and reflection around how we're delivering our restore in a restorative way. And I think it's important that we don't just measure outcomes, but we measure how we deliver our roles. So we're looking at quite a bit of change there. And then just going back to training as well. So when you look at the sort of HR training that we deliver around investigations, wellbeing, performance management, integrating a trauma-informed approach there, keep going back to what is a restorative trauma-informed approach? How does it impact the manager-employee experience? And how can we deliver this experience, whatever the module is, through a trauma-informed lens? There's lots of different things that we're trying to do across college to drive that sort of that culture shift and embed that practice, develop that practice, working alongside Carlie and Polly to have the best impact that we can.
Right, thank you, Philippa. That's really comprehensive.
Yet again?
Yeah, go on, Polly. Go on.
I just wanted to say that the quality team, so our quality assurance whole team, they use WINE. I love this acronym, WINE. Who wouldn't? But it's I wonder, I imagine, I notice, and empathy. So when they're going to do, I mean, we use lesson observations, but the walkthroughs, it's about being warmly welcomed into the classroom by the practitioner, and they get we've created these wonderful postcards that we give to staff saying, thank you for welcoming me into your classroom today, thank you for sharing, I noticed, I wondered, I imagined, and having empathy. We're not going in there judging, criticizing. We have feedback, feed forward process now. So when Philippa's talking about that restorative language and those restorative approaches, this is very much at the core of everything our quality team are doing in the way they communicate out right across the college. So these are huge we are all cultural architects every single day. Mm-hmm. And that's the role of being an educator.
Great, thank you. I just there's a question that's come up that I mean, this could be a very long answer, so it probably is a case of
I won't speak then.
No, I'm just saying, I know all of you could talk on this for a while, but someone's asked, what strategies would you recommend to use when supporting a teenager to care about their behavior? And I'm guessing they meant how that will affect others. So care about their behavior and how it affects others. So if it was one strategy that you'd kick off with, Carlie?
Do you want me to come in, Polly? When we originally started on our restorative practice journey, we had some external training delivered, and it was restorative justice for schools, and they adopted very much a restorative justice approach that had been within the system, and that circles nicely all the way back to the beginning, which was part of the process that Polly experienced in those circumstances. And it is really important when you've got new people to this that they're using the script that is given, and that both parties also are asked the same questions. So some of them are, what happened, how were you feeling at the time, how who else was impacted? And one of the notes that I'd written down in preparation for today was teenagers very rarely understand their own power and their own impact and effect on other people, and it is incredibly rare over the hundreds and hundreds of students that we've used this approach with over the last few years. I can probably count on one hand those students who didn't care about the impact that they had on others. They just didn't know. They just needed support to understand that they are powerful and their actions have consequences not just for them. So using those very standardized questions, but having the curiosity to dig a little bit about, and sometimes you need to suggest it. And Polly and I have been in inclusion panels where until that panel, that young person in front of us did not understand the impact they were having on their own mum. And we've done, you know, almost restorative interventions in that family then, because, you know, the mum's broken down. And until that point, that teenager, because of the way their brains are still wired, didn't understand how they were hurting somebody else. So that would be my answer, is dig a little bit, use some restorative practice questions. You can find them as a script anywhere. And until it becomes habit, it's okay to script it. But if you're doing it with two people, just make sure that you're asking the same of both, because you will have a perceived wrongdoer and a perceived victim potentially. But it's important that both parties recognise what they were both bringing to that. And on that point, I would just say as well, make sure your staff know what they're bringing to that and looking after themselves as well.
Great, thank you, Carlie. So I just want to kind of, I suppose, come back and maybe look at well, just one question actually, Philippa, for yourself, and maybe Polly, you can chime in on this. I mean, Polly, you mentioned, you know, your principal came in 4 years ago and he was adamant thought it was very powerful work and he wanted to roll it out across the organisation. So I'm presuming it's crucial to get that support from senior leadership. So why was that so important? Maybe Polly, you'll start, and Philippa, you could give more impact.
Anybody listening to this who works in further education and has a cross-college role knows that that's a very hard place to be. And anybody trying to put forward a strategy or an initiative or whatever from that middle management position or even senior leadership position, sometimes it's really difficult. So when Polly said, right, go and make this happen right across the college, how can I help you? I said, governors. If governors back this, then I'm just not a lone voice shouting in the wind, because you know, I had to report back to governors on progress on a regular basis. So I asked for it to be a key strategic priority. And to do that, I had to put a presentation together and go to the whole of corporation and say, this is what we want to do. Now, bearing in mind that key strategic priorities are normally about finance, they're normally about buildings, they're normally about growth, they're normally about, you know, qualifications or whatever. So to say we want to be a trauma-informed restorative college as a key strategic priority was something that was really left field to a governing body. So that's when the why became really important. And then it was, why wouldn't we? And it was unanimously supported. And it became that we were the first college in the country to have it. I don't know if anyone else ever has, actually, as a key strategic priority. And it has been for the last 3 years. So at the end of a year, I had to go back and say, why would we want it to be year 2 and year 3? And so it was incredibly important in order to be effective in rolling it out and embedding, because the big message was, this matters to this college, it matters to the principal, it matters to the governing body, it matters to senior leaders. This is something that is important. And I would not have wanted to do it without that structure and that support behind me. I don't even know if we could have.
Yeah. And Philippa, anything to add on that?
No, I think Polly said that perfectly. I think it's about embedding it into the fabric of the DNA. That was a comment one of the governors used only a week or 2 ago, and it has to sit front and central. It has to be being driven. Yes, it's shared ownership across the college. It's an investment we're all making. And it's that constant nudge, but it needs to be role modeled. That direction needs to be set and it needs to be reinforced.
Great, thank you. And I'd like to kind of finish up on how you believe this approach has strengthened relationships. I mean, I think a couple of you've mentioned it, you know, we've all mentioned it probably, that actually it's strengthened the relationships between the students, the staff, the academic staff, you name it, within the college. So maybe Carlie, if you could, I know we've only got about a minute, but if you could give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I would really speak to, you know, the aim being that our students leave us with the relational skills to be successful in whatever their next step is. And in terms of, yes, on an individual level, we're building strong relationships, strong professional relationships. And it's important not to shy away from students know that they're loved and that, you know, in this community, we love each other. And by doing that, you're building good, solid relationships with education, which ultimately is going to stand them in good stead. If they're not quite ready when they leave us, you know, to go on to the next stage of education, they'll come back because they had that good, positive relationship with learning at some point, and somebody cared about them within an education setting. And I don't think it can be more powerful than that.
No, that I'm not sure what else anyone else can say. That does sound really, really powerful. I think we could talk about this for much longer. I certainly could, because you've all got a lot of really interesting things to say, and we've had lots of positive comments from the audience. But it is 11 o'clock, and I'm afraid that's all we've got time for this morning. I think we will revisit, and we've got plans to do that later on in the year, and I really look forward to that. And to hear more. And I know, I'm guessing the audience would too. So thank you to everyone who took time out of their morning to join us. I hope you found the session as interesting and as thought-provoking as I did, because it makes me think about, you know, how we all approach things. And I think every organization, every leader can learn something from this. But really a very, very big thank you to my three wonderful guests from Kirklees. Thank you, Philippa, Carlie and Polly, for, you know, sharing your time and your expertise so generously with us today. And just a reminder, we will share the recording of the session in the next 24 hours, and we'll try to put in as many of those references that you all made, you know, various maybe clips or articles as much as possible. And there'll be information how you can reach out and make contact if you want to have a more in-depth conversation. But thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of the day.